Hello, I'm Dave Wettlaufer, and welcome to another of my RV videos. You know, there comes a time when even the best made RV, if there ever was such a thing, needs some tender loving care to maintain it, to correct those engineering shortcomings that were almost but not quite well enough implemented to last a lifetime, and to spruce up the interior to suit the wife. Imagine that. Our unit here is a 2007 Carriage Carry-Lite model, and even though back then Carriage was known as a higher-end fifth-wheel manufacturer, our coach has had its share of issues. Over the years I've got them pretty much all worked out. This year we decided it was time to replace the flooring in the main living and kitchen area. It was originally part carpet and part laminate. The carpet had become soiled over the years, and the laminate had its share of scratches and marks from the slide moving in and out, and also because of some water damage. Because the original flooring went underneath the kitchen slide, and also because I knew there was some roof water damage, I knew the best way to do these updates and repairs was to completely remove the slide. Fortunately, we have a garage that is large enough to accommodate the RV and the removed slide. It all made for an extended winter 2023 project. There's lots of things to disconnect from the kitchen slide, including 120 volt AC circuits, 12 volt DC circuits, water and drain lines, and a propane hose. So that was the first step. The next step was the removal of the trim and the boards on the perimeter of the slide. Carriage made these from 2 layers of 1/2 inch plywood. And of course, these are what butt up against the inside walls of the RV and prevents the slide from making an undesired exit. Now, in preparation for this project, I had made up a heavy-duty dolly to support the exterior wall of the slide, and prepared other dollies for additional support. It would have been a bit of a bummer if the slide had ended up on the garage floor. The 2 main tubes that move the slide are 3-inch square steel, and I made up a couple of extensions for these tubes. This allowed me to use the slide motor to push the slide out of the RV on the dollies. Now, some of you may be wondering, how much did this slide weigh? And so did I. I used the specs from the appliance manuals, plus a semi-educated guess on the slide itself, to decide that the dollies would likely carry the weight okay. Of course, I knew beforehand how much weight the dollies would carry. Later in the summer of 2023, I removed the other slide and was able to more or less weigh that one empty. Based on that, I after the fact determined that this kitchen slide likely weighs in at about 1,500 pounds. I enlisted the help of my brother to do the removal, which only took about an hour. Because of how our garage is laid out, we had to pull the RV partially out of the garage, remove the slide, pull the RV completely out, roll the slide over to the other side of the garage, and then bring the RV back in before we could close the door and get the garage heater turned on again. This was all happening in February in southern Ontario, Canada. So for any viewers way down south, that white stuff is called snow. It may look pretty, but I hate it. The next step was to get on with the actual work. Here's what it looked like once I removed the original laminate and carpet. You can see a few areas that had been wet sometime in the past. I made sure they were completely dried out. Here's a look back at what I did for the rollers along the side of the RV. You can see I've installed 4 sets of rollers. I used the same locations, but Carriage had used 2 rollers at each of the end locations and 1 each in the middle locations. The original rollers appeared to me to be somewhat more homemade looking than I prefer, and some didn't roll very well either. But to be fair, they were about 17 years old. One thing I found that for some unknown reason, with the pair of rollers at the rear location, the factory had installed them with the inside ends overlapping, which of course meant that one end of one roller would sit higher than the other. I also noted that in that location, the 5/8 plywood subfloor had bowed considerably. All the rollers were only screwed to the plywood with no support underneath. I consider that to be a poor design. I sourced the new rollers from Cass Hudson, a name that came up several times in RV sites. They have several models of rollers, and I picked a model that they have rated at over 400 pounds To mount them, I used two lengths of 1 by 1 inch by 1/8 inch angle, and the new rollers fit inside these angles just right. The angles are sitting on aluminum tubing that supports the main floor. This tubing is 3 inches wide by 2 inches tall, but still with a thin wall. I anticipate my new setup will support the slide just fine, and if I measured accurately and I did my math correctly, the entire slide will sit about 1/4 of an inch lower than it originally did. Now let's have a look at what I did to the slide itself. One reason I wanted to remove the slide was to allow for easy installation of the new flooring, but the other reason was to make it relatively easy to replace the roof membrane. I'd known for a few years now that there was a couple of soft areas at either end, so I wanted to replace the entire membrane. Ripping off TPO that is glued to cheap thin plywood is a messy job. I replaced the fiberglass insulation, put down all new sheeting, and then applied a piece of PVC I got from a roofing contractor for about half what it would have cost from RV suppliers. I used Dicor adhesive for PVC and got it all back together, hopefully good for another 15 years. Another thing I had to re-engineer was a new roller under the part of the countertop area that protrudes into the main room. Carriage had the small roller screwed up to the underside of the plywood subfloor, so not much structure to support it. Over the years that roller's axle had bent, and its facing had become pitted and dirty and had worn off some of the old laminate floor. This time I wanted an adjustable roller with a much larger roller surface area on the floor. I again turned to Cass Hudson. They were quick to ship and their product quality seems good, but I could have saved a couple $100 in Canadian tax and brokerage fees if Cass Hudson would have had some good engineering drawings for each product. Fortunately, with the information they do provide and their photos, I didn't choose any model that wouldn't work. They have a heavy-duty adjustable model, rather expensive at $90 each, that I decided could likely work in place of the original, such that I could adjust and even remove it from the inside without ever having to get under the slide floor at all. However, I got to thinking that ideally there should be another of this roller mounted towards the rear end of the slide, so I ended up ordering a second one to mount under the fireplace beside the fridge. It took some time to get the structure in place for it, but I think it will work out well. Ideally, the entire slide should move in and out, staying level and squared up, rather than tilting down as it comes in. I'm optimistic now that these two adjustable rollers will keep the front of the slide up such that consistent spacing between the main floor and the underside of the slide floor will be maintained, and nothing will ever scratch the new vinyl flooring. I hope. So of course, when guys like me do this customizing stuff, we have to ensure somehow that it looks good and is approved by the wife. So to finish everything off, I fabricated a nice carpeted cover that almost looks like it was always supposed to be there. Of course, when the slide moves in and out, the rollers mounted in the main floor contact the underside of the slide floor, which in this RV is 3 16-inch thick plywood covered with thin waterproofing material. I could feel in some places where the plywood had started to slightly compress from years of being rolled on, so I decided I would install 4 pieces of 11-gauge sheet steel. That's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And these would span a couple of the floor joists to spread weight out over more structure. While these plates would be on the underside and thus never directly in nasty weather, I still decided it would be best in the long term to get them powder coated. I used stainless steel Tech-type flathead screws and construction adhesive to attach these plates. You might say that this was a bit of overkill, and it did add about 80 pounds of weight, but I have no concern now over these rollers and the slide floor not being well supported. So that covers the main points of what I've spent the past several weeks working on, sometimes a couple hours each day. up to about 5 to 6 hours on other days. I've got my brother booked to come in and help in a few days to get this baby all back together. As I said before, removing the slide took just over an hour. Of course, I had everything all disconnected and all the jacks in place. We'll see how long it takes to get it back in there. The new flooring is vinyl plank, which looks good and has the added benefit of not soaking up water as the old laminate did. We put carpet in the other slide in order to make it easier to have a flat floor transition. Eventually the same carpet will go into the bedroom area as well. You can see I still have to get the new trim installed around the slide, and that will happen shortly. It will look like this. You may also notice a new refrigerator here now. I'll tell you about that in another video. Of course, it took longer to get the slide back in than it did to pull it out, but it all went well, and eventually everything got hooked up again. We like to get out with the RV in the spring before the summer crowds hit the campgrounds. We did a test run down to one of my wife's favorite places, Shipshewana, Indiana, and the slide rolled in and out just like it's supposed to. While we were there, we picked up a new set of theater chairs from the Lambright factory. Rather expensive, but very nice and very comfortable as well. So that was the big winter project. But as I indicated earlier, my slide removing time was not over. After our spring outings, I decided I really should remove the other slide. That was my midsummer project. I'll put a link below when I get that video completed. As I've often said over the years, there's always something to repair, replace, or upgrade on any RV. It's a perpetual job. I hope you've got some ideas from my experiences. Thanks for watching.